I'd like to welcome you to our 50th anniversary speaker series here at Newbury College. And my name is Amy Shirley, and it's my pleasure to serve as the Dean of Student Affairs and to welcome you to our campus. One of our tenets of our mission at the college is preparing students for lifelong learning. Today's guest embodies a commitment to education, a passion for service, and shows us that even after a successful career, there could be another story to tell. Liz Walker is an award-winning television journalist, a documentary film producer, an entrepreneur, and a humanitarian currently working in the war-torn country of the Sudan. A 2005 graduate of Harvard Divinity School and an ordained minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Liz has chosen to combine her communication skills with her passion for serving the world. To New Englanders, she will always be known as Liz, and certainly graced the television in my own living room for 20 years. And after 32 years as a television news journalist, nearly 20 of those anchoring WBZ Television's evening newscast in Boston, Liz has most recently hosted a special television magazine program called Better Living with Liz Walker on WCVB television here in Boston. It's my distinct honor to welcome Liz to our campus.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Oh, you know what? You're going to have to talk to me. So when I say good evening, I'm like call and response. That's African Methodist Episcopal religious tradition. That's black preaching tradition. So good evening. Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you and to be with you at this school, and to congratulate you on your 50th anniversary. This is wonderful. This is my neighborhood, my old neighborhood. I used to live down the street, so I feel like I know this campus. I've walked around here and watched this campus grow, so it's lovely and wonderful to be with you today. I was on television. When I was on television, I think I was on for about 135 years, a long time ago, and most of you are too young to know that. I realize that. I was a news reporter back when there were only 3 channels. This is history to you, right? And you may not believe this, but you actually had to get up and go push the TV screen to change the channel. So that's when I was on television, back in the day. I was a television news reporter in Little Rock, Arkansas, which was my hometown. Then I moved to Denver, Colorado in television news. I worked in San Francisco and came to Boston in 1980. I know there's some communication students here. I hope a few communication students here. Anybody in communications? Great. So I definitely want to talk to you about that because that's the bulk of my career. It was in communications. But what I wanted to tell you about was just how kind of my life changed and how I took what I had in communications and began to live another way. So maybe I can offer you a little insight into that. There have been many chapters in my life. When I came to Boston, I was the first African-American woman to anchor the weeknight news show. That had never happened in Boston, and it was a huge deal. As a matter of fact, I remember Boston had just been coming out of the busing crisis back in the 70s. This is ancient history to you. And Boston was not really getting over that. And when I got here in 1980, the issue of a black woman as a news anchor was unheard of. They didn't think the city would be ready for it, quite frankly. They didn't think that I would make it because nobody had ever done it. And when you think of that now, just how much sense does that make? But back in the day, it was a big deal. So I look at my life as crossing borders. That's what I like to think of what I've done in my life. I grew up, as I said, or may not have told you, in Little Rock, Arkansas at a time when this country was going through a lot of civil unrest, the civil rights movement. I actually would go to churches and see Martin Luther King, so he is not history to me. That was the current affairs of my life. I grew up where this country was going through a lot of struggle. The women's movement was a big deal back then. Women weren't on TV back then. Now you would find this kind of ancient history. But when I was a kid growing up, the only women I saw on TV was Mrs. Cleaver Is anybody, these kids are going, what is she talking about? Leave It to Beaver, right? This was a TV show that was on. I'm sure they've made a movie out of it recently. And Mrs. Cleaver was a woman who was always in the kitchen. And she always had a beautiful little apron on. And that was what I knew about women in television. So crossing borders meant getting into positions and finding ways to break through walls and glass ceilings to reach other levels. And I was always inspired by people to do that. But of all the things that I had done, and becoming a television journalist was a huge, huge move in my career. I had never been to Africa. I'd never heard about Africa. Just as I thought women were relegated to the kitchen, and that's a great place to be. I know this is a culinary arts institution, and I applaud that, but to be in the kitchen and get paid is a lot different from just being in the kitchen and not getting respect. And so I didn't know anything about women other than the kitchen, but I didn't know anything about Africa. When I was a little girl watching television, the only thing I knew about Africa was the Tarzan movies. Tarzan, do they have those on TV anymore? I know, I could be talking ancient history again. Tarzan was this big, handsome, built, virile-looking man. Back in the day when I watched television was Johnny Weissmuller. Nobody's that old in this room. But anyway, he was the king of the jungle. Now, the fact that a white man could be the king of the jungle in Africa and nobody would question that was one of those things I never questioned when I was a child. That was just what life was, that he would be the king of the jungle. And every Saturday morning I watched the Tarzan movies on television, black and white television. I loved Tarzan, and he was strong, and he could swim for miles, and he could do all kinds of things, and he could save all kinds of people who got stranded in the jungle. Every Saturday morning, Tarzan would be chased by 1,000 Africans, a tribe of Africans, angry at Tarzan every Saturday morning. I never knew why. They didn't talk. They didn't have speaking roles. You didn't know what tribe they were. You didn't know what part of Africa you were in. You just knew they were angry at Tarzan. And every Saturday morning, Tarzan, just in the nick of time, would grab a vine, and he would swing across a cliff, and he would do that Tarzan yell. Now, y'all don't know that Tarzan yell, right? Tarzan yell, I'm sure. And every Saturday morning he would do the Tarzan yell, and he would swing across the cliff. And every Saturday morning behind him, 1,000 Africans would rush after him, and every Saturday morning they would fall off the cliff. And that's all I knew about Africa. So if you ask me, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I did not know if I could be Tarzan, but I didn't want to be an African. No future in that. And so that was the image I had of Africa, even into adulthood. 2001, in the summer, I had the opportunity to go and shoot a story, a news story, of some Bostonians who were going to Africa. They were going to Sudan, and Sudan at that time was a country at war against itself. It was in a civil war that had been going on for more than 2 decades, and millions of people had been slaughtered, and millions of people had been homeless, and hundreds of thousands, we were told, were taken into slavery. This was in 2001 that I heard about this. There were some people going from Boston that I really respected and liked, and I thought this would be a great story. The truth of the matter was I wanted to do a story that would get me an Emmy. And I thought this would be the story, because who does stories on these kinds of things? And slavery in the 21st century, unheard of. So I went to my news director and I said, I got a great story for you, Peter. We got to go to Sudan. There's a war, and there are people being taken slaves, and some Bostonians are going. Can we go? And Peter said, you know what? That's an international story. We're a local television station. We cover local news. We don't cover international stories. The network might be interested in that, but we're not. And I thought, Peter, you really? This is a great story. Bostonians. And we went back and forth, and he didn't want to go. Something in my life had changed. Something had changed, because this time I decided to go by myself. I would go with this group of Bostonians who were investigating slavery in Sudan, and I would, if I couldn't afford a photographer, and certainly I couldn't, I would shoot my own video. I had been in television news for many years. I knew what a good story was. This was a good story. I didn't know how to shoot, but this was when digital was just coming out, and I got a little camera, and I figured I'll figure it out. So we went. There were probably 12 humanitarians, human rights activists, and a couple of preachers who were going to Sudan. And I was going to do a news story, and I was going to get an award, and I was going to come back and put it on the air, and I was going to change the world in the sense that I'd have this award for putting on a story that nobody heard about. Well, we went to Sudan that summer, but what we saw was so horrendous. I had never seen anything like it in my life. I had never been in a conflict zone. I had covered wars, but not quite like this. I'd never been on the ground. I had never seen people who were traumatized, people who had been had lost limbs, people who had lost members of their families to hackings and machete attacks, and people whose villages had been burned down. I'd just never seen anything like this in my life. The people I was with were there to do some good. I was there to tell a story. So I put my camera on, and we went from village to village back in the summer. It was in July, right after the 4th of July. We were there for about 2.5 weeks. And we interviewed these people through interpreters. And they told us about this horrendous war. And they told us what they had lost. And it was devastating. And I'd just never seen it. And at some point along the way, the journalist part of me wasn't enough. Because you're looking straight in the face of oppression and repression and misery and pain and trauma. And you're looking in the face of the world. And suddenly, maybe not suddenly, maybe slowly, things begin to change for you. I was in tears at the end of every night. When we talked to these people, we'd met women who had been raped, gang raped. One woman's name was Mary, I'll never forget it, and she had been raped by 15 soldiers. One woman raped by 15 soldiers one night. And more stories like this. The people I traveled with stood there and said, you know, we're going to do something to help you. And I was doing my story. And at some point, that doing the story was not enough. It wasn't enough. And at some point, I had to put the camera down. So somewhere in that 2-week period, I did, and I began to listen to these stories and realize that this world is in a lot of trouble. There's a lot of mess going on out there. And there are people around here who want to do something about it. And it was inspiring to me. It was something I'd never thought about. You know how when Hurricane Katrina hit, and there were people on the rooftops, and they were waving flags, and all the people with the cameras from NBC and ABC and CNN and all the networks from all over the world were in the helicopters, and they were flying over, and they were telling you that these people were in trouble. And if you think about that, and getting the story is really important, so I'm not at all putting down journalism, but for some in that helicopter, for some people who were covering that, that wasn't enough. And they had to cross that line from reporting it, which is this kind of subjective, removed stance, to actually doing something about it. So what I guess I'm talking about is advocacy journalism, which is very controversial. A lot of people think it's not necessary, you shouldn't do it. But I became an advocate for the Sudan because nobody was talking about it. Nobody was doing anything about it. And so, after that first year, in July of 2001, I ended up doing my story. It was a 3-part series, and I brought it back to Boston. And I told my news director at WBZ TV, I have the greatest story for you. We have got to get this on the air. It's about slavery, Peter. These are people who are telling stories about being enslaved and forced into labor here in... How does that exist? It's about Bostonians, Peter, who are doing some great things, trying to help these people, and who want to go back to Sudan. And, Peter, I've got this other story that I didn't even know I was going to get. There is a terrorist network that is building in Sudan. His name is Osama bin Laden, and he's building Al-Qaeda there. And they say he's going to take over the world. They're really afraid of him. Peter said, you know what, Liz? I respect you. I think you're a good person. It's an international story. we're a local television station. It's not important for us. That's about what's going over there with them. And so that was in the summer. Peter and I went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Would I ever get this story on the air? And it wasn't, the biggest groundbreaking story in the world, but it was pretty big for me. And it wasn't even about the awards anymore. Now it was about telling the story of some people whose story hadn't been told. And the sidebar of Osama bin Laden was just icing on the cake. Peter wouldn't put the story on the air. Until the end of the summer, he came to me. He said, you know what? We've got some space in September. I'm going to run your story September 11th, 2001. Honest to goodness, this is the God's truth. September 11th, 2001, my little piece was supposed to air. But of course, on that day, they blew up the towers, and the whole world changed. And they blew up the Pentagon, and some people fought back and crashed a plane in Pennsylvania, and everything changed. But you know what changed for me? What changed for me out of all that horror? And Peter and I still talk about this, because we're still good friends, even though we're both not in television news anymore, is the problems that we said were theirs that day became ours. And the people that we called them were us. And so my message to young people, no matter what your dreams are, what your purpose is, what your major is, what you're going to do with your life as far as your education, my message to you is you got to do something for the world. You've got to. We have no choices now. And that involves crossing borders. I'm not here to preach a sermon. I'm not here to try to tell you have to go to Sudan. But I think that if you are blessed in life, there will be circumstances you will run into, and they could be right in this neighborhood. They could be over in West Roxbury. They could be in downtown Boston. You will run into something that makes you want to cross a border, that makes you want to do something. You will see a child in need, or you might run into a person who's sick, or you might run into a situation where a family needs some help. It could have happened in the last few days with the snow. There is sometimes these forces in the universe occur, and everything changes. You see, I got into television news to make money. I'll be honest with you. And I made a lot of money. Television news back in the day, when there were only 3 channels, and you had to get up and change the channels, local television news made huge. It was huge money because it was new. That's no longer the case now because everybody's on TV, and anybody can be on TV. And so the revenues are not as great as they once were, at least not for those of us at my level. But I got into TV for the wrong reason. I got into TV not because I wanted to change the world, but because I thought it was a good business. What I found is the world is still in need of changing, and people have to tell stories to do that. And so those of you who are in communications, my advice is, please tell stories that shed light on dark places, because there's so many dark places. If you watch television these days, I don't care about the Real Housewives in Atlanta. Am I the only one? I don't. And I can get, we just talked about that this afternoon. You kind of get sucked into that conversation, because looking at somebody who's crazier than you are sometimes feels good. But essentially, that's not what TV should be about. I'm sorry. That's not what communication should be about. Any profession that you go into, there has to be this sense of the greater good. It really does. And I guess I didn't realize that until I went to Sudan. The people that I journeyed with were so outraged by what they saw that they decided that we should go back. And that's when I decided that I didn't want to be a journalist anymore. And so I left my job at WBZ-TV in the late 2001, at least my main anchor job, doing the 6 and 11 news. I went back to school. I went to Harvard, to divinity school, to learn about theology and philosophy and meaning and what life was all about. And I kept traveling back to Sudan. And so for the past 11 years, I have traveled back and forth to villages in South Sudan. Sudan now, South Sudan, is the world's newest country. The result of all of those wars that were going on for more than 2 decades resulted in a split. It ended in a split between the north, which is an Islamic, a very rigid and very fundamental Islamic sect that controls the North Sudan, which is called Sudan, and the South, which is a new country, as I just said, is full of animist tribes, 500 different tribes. Religion, Christianity is the basic religion, but they're split. The South has no money, but it has all the oil. The North has no oil, but all the money. And so that's the conflict. And the fights and all of the wars and all of the jihads and all of the Osama bin, all of that has really essentially been around this oil, because oil rules the world. And so whoever has the oil or can get the oil is in charge. But the downside of that is that the people in Sudan have been suffering in South Sudan. Not unlike many other countries in North Africa and East Africa. You've heard about the issues in Somalia. You've heard about the issues in Western Africa. So people have been suffering because of greed. So what this group that I went with decided to do was we would make a connection with one village. We did. In the south, the village of Akan. We would go back as often as we could, and we would try to make a difference. We'd ask them what they needed. And so they told us what they needed, and this was over years, 2001, 2002. I'm now in divinity school. I'm working part-time at Channel 4, and I'm traveling. I'm commuting back to Sudan, Africa, which is 21 hours away and 9,000 miles. They wanted us to end the war. They thought we could do that. We didn't know if we could do that. We were just 6 or 7 people at this time. But they also wanted a school. And the people I was with thought that we could build a school. Women in South Sudan are, fewer than 1% are educated. Women in most of the world are uneducated. Uneducated, period. No education. In South Sudan, the women now are trying to get through to elementary education, the very basics. So they wanted their girls to be educated. Because when you educate women, and this is nothing against men, but when you educate women, you educate a whole community. Because women are mothers, their outreach is much wider and deeper, and so the idea of educating women was really essential for this community. And so the people that I was with, and I keep saying the people, but they were 2 ministers and a couple of humanitarians, decided we could build a school. I do news. I don't do schools. Build a school? How could you build a school? That makes no sense. How in the dickens could we go build a school on the other side? We had no money. We didn't have a language. But they thought this is what we could do. And they were the most inspiring people I ever met. And so we began the work of trying to build a school in South Sudan. And that was in 2002 that we talked to the South Sudan, the people who were in education, who were trying to get their people educated. We made friends all over the world. We talked to other organizations. We talked to humanitarian groups who were already working there. We had to learn a lot of lessons. We began to raise money. And I decided that I would take my work as a reporter and a journalist to help pay for the school. And so I'm going to show you a film, and this is only 6 minutes long. You thought this is going to be the longest speech you've ever seen in your life. Only 6 minutes long. And it's the video that started our film project, because now I make documentaries. And it's called, well, this is, you'll see what this is. Now, do I point at this or point at it? You think I know this film?
The half of humanity that have never borne arms is today ready to struggle to make the brotherhood of man a reality. Perhaps the universal sisterhood is necessary before the universal brotherhood is possible.
Imagine a war that has gone on most of your life, destroying everything in its path. Villages burned, men killed, women and children enslaved and raped. This is the story of Sudan.
At the night time, even I witnessed about 15 people comes and rape me.
What's a mock execution?
They pretended they're going to cut your throat, they just cut the surface.
And all that man raped this woman. Yes.
During the war, when people were running, my firstborn actually drowned in the river, and I lost my baby because someone was carrying that baby and I was carrying another baby. So that is the disaster which actually have faced me during the war. When I first met Gloria, we just met and she introduced herself and I introduced myself. And from there I admired, like, this person will really help me. So the name of Gloria is a glory from the God.
You think you want to rape another woman? I don't think so!
My girlfriend, Gloria White Hammond, is a Boston preacher who, along with her husband, Ray, pastors my church, Bethel AME, in Jamaica Plain.
Praise the Lord. Amen. Don't you just love this man?
She's also a pediatrician at Boston South End Health Clinic. But as far as I'm concerned, the most amazing thing about her is her single-minded mission to support the people of Sudan.
There's your cab right there. This whole idea of one woman taking on a movement is just extraordinary to me. How did this even evolve?
You know, that is a very good question. What in the world am I doing here?
Bring you greetings from America.
I do know it's God, and I have these incredible girlfriends.
There are 6 of us who have helped Gloria create a grassroots initiative called My Sister's Keeper to support women in Sudan who are picking up the pieces of their lives and their country.
I keep coming because I can see the strength and the stability, the level of commitment that people have here. I also come as an African American woman. But what we have suffered is nothing compared to what you have suffered.
Darfur is really a hard place, and there was something about the anguish there that eventually led Gloria to tell us about her own pain.
I was the third of 8 children. The first 4 were all girls. And my father molested me when I was 7 and 8, 9, something like that. I only recently came to understand the role that it's played in my ongoing work in Sudan. And I talked to Ray about it, and he said, of course. It was so obvious to him, too.
This time last year, I went to Darfur. I went on behalf of American women to let the women of Darfur know that we have not turned a blind eye to their plight.
I am prayerful that we will see the world clamoring to stop genocide, not just genocide in Darfur, but to stop allowing genocide to be an option for people.
So Gloria works on healing for herself and for our new friends. She's helped make some miracles here and inspired a lot of people, like Achol, who's now one of the most powerful women in Sudan's south.
Achol has now become a leader in New Sudan. This is a woman who was educated in schools here, finished high school, and is very bright and articulate, and symbolizes what can be.
In the 6th county, I'm the only lady which is a commissioner.
If you just give them the opportunity and give them the support, this is what can come. And then they become leaders in their communities, and we believe that that becomes a win for the entire world.
And we built a school for them. And the first day of that school was in 2007. It took us 6 years to do it. Gloria Whitehammond is the woman who I'm talking about when I say these inspiring people. And when the school opened, we had 1,000 girls. Many had walked 4 and 5 hours to get to our little school. Of all the things I've done in life, and I've done a lot of things. I've interviewed presidents, I've been all over the world, I've covered big stories, I've gotten good seats at restaurants. Of all the things I've done, this has been the most rewarding. Not because it made it on TV, because it didn't. Not because, I got any awards or rewards or anything like that for it, but because it was shedding light in a dark place in the world. A little light. Right now, the situation in Sudan is horrible, quite frankly. The conflicts have picked up again. People are fighting again. There is the possibility that our school, and you did not see our school, it's a very tiny structure, 8 classrooms. It has a little place for where you can have a cafeteria. There are outhouses, but it's wonderful for these people. There's a possibility our school could be bombed, and that everything we did would be destroyed. And then I think that's pretty selfish of me, because these people would lose their lives and the war would pick up again. But I felt like we had to try to do something. And so that's my message to you. You have to try to do something. And again, doesn't have to be Sudan. Could be education. Could be any issue that appeals to you. One of my favorite authors, Frederick Buechner, describes a calling. He's a spiritual writer. He says a calling is when your joy meets the world's needs. When something that gives you great joy, something that you're passionate about, meets the world's needs. I have always liked to tell stories. And so telling this little story, we ended up with a 45-minute documentary that raised probably $200,000 over the course of many, many years to help this school, maybe $150,000 to help the school that we wanted to build. But that was the greatest thing, second to the birth of my son, that I've ever achieved. And even when I think in terms of the fact that I won't be able to do everything, that this school may not make it, it's still satisfying to know that we tried. The world's problems, you can watch the State of the Union speech tonight, and you can look at Congress fight and fuss, and you can see how people try to figure things out. I am thoroughly convinced, after having seen a lot of the world, that the world's problems will not be solved alone by economics or by politics or by the biggest brains in the world. They will be solved by heart, by spirit, by perseverance, by endurance, by reaching out, by crossing a border, meeting somebody you don't know, making a friend from somebody who used to be considered the other. We have to do that right here in our neighborhoods, but we certainly have to do that in the world. And we may not do it all. Liberation theologist Oscar Romero from South America, Central America, said, we cannot do everything, and there's a sense of liberation in realizing that. Because the fact that we cannot do everything means that we can do something. And everybody has to do something. So that's what I do. I go around and tell you, please do something for the world. It really does make a difference. It's not going to make you rich. I'm now a preacher at a teeny little church in Roxbury. I make no money. Sometimes I think, I just want to tell y'all how I used to be rich. But nobody cares. But I am trying to do something. And that's important. When I was a little girl, growing up in Little Rock, about 6 years old, Martin Luther King came to our community, and my father took me to see him. And I really didn't want to go. I remember this. I was probably 7. I didn't want to go because my dad used to drag me to every place he went. He was a preacher, and I had to go. I saw more funerals than most people saw in a lifetime. Because my mother had died, and he didn't have anything to do with my brother and me, so he took us with him. And so we saw funerals, we saw weddings, and we, this day, got to see Dr. Martin Luther King speak. And I remembered that event because I was up in the balcony, and he had just come off the successful bus boycott in Montgomery, and he was spreading the word about the civil rights movement. And this was way back before the movement had started, before people had lost too many lives. This was right after the busing situation. But he was trying to get people worked up about it. And I was in the balcony, and he was talking, and he was inspiring people. And it was what I call now a kairos moment. Kairos is a Greek term. You who are students know this. It is a term that means opportune time. It is a term when the world is in great peril, but great possibility. And that's what the 50s were. And Martin Luther King stood up and told people, you can make a difference, and we can change the world, and we have to. And he did that. He went around to church, to church, to church, to church, and common everyday people, the hairdresser, and the postman, and the busboy, and the maids got together, and they decided to stand up for something that was bigger than themselves, and it had nothing to do with making money. It had nothing to do with fame or fortune. It was just because it was the right thing to do. And he inspired me as well. And that was an incredible moment. And I look around today, and I think, you know what? This is a kairos moment, too. We have a continuation of global economic meltdown happening, and people don't know how we're going to get out of this economic morass. And there's global warming, there's water shortages, there's food shortages all over the world. And the world is getting smaller every day. Somebody's got to do something. This is a kairos moment. And I don't think it takes Martin Luther King's. And I don't think it takes going to Sudan. And I don't think it means that you have to stand up and be a preacher. But I think you have to have your consciousness raised to know that it matters what you do. And that's why I go out. And I hope that somebody in here has an answer to some of these huge problems. Because if you're not part of the solution, thanks. God bless you. To talk with you about anything you want to talk about. I know I tend to get up and preach. I can't help that, but I can certainly talk to you about communications or humanitarian work or whatever you want. Does anybody have any questions? No questions? Yes, ma'am.
What was the last time
the first African-American woman to be on television was exciting. I think there was a lot of expectation, a lot of fears, but people were really good. The press made a big deal about it. I'm not so sure that the community was as crazed as the press is. You know, there's a difference. You know that, don't you? Don't believe everything you see on Fox News, okay? I'm just saying. You see Fox News and you watch it, and then you turn the channel off or you click the channel off and you just want to slap somebody. I'm like, why did I feel this way? Okay. But the media made it into a big deal. And I guess it was a big deal. So I didn't think about it. I just tried to do my job. I grew up in the South. I grew up in a struggle. I have always been told that I'm going to have to struggle. And my mother told me, you're going to have to go 150 miles when everybody else is going 100 miles. So that's always been my style. That's how I roll. So I'm going to work harder to get to my end, just because that's what I was told. And so that's what Boston always was for me. It was about like this. I have to do the best job. I have to work harder. And I just did that. So I wasn't paying any attention. Now that I'm off television, and it's been quite a while that I'm off television, people come up to me and say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I meet you, and you used to do this, and I saw you, and now I'm beginning to realize the impact that my presence had. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about it. I was just thinking about doing what I had to do. Now I have people saying that, you know, because you were there, I can do this, or I thought I could do this because I watched you. And that's very satisfying, but that was not in my mind at all then. When you're in those positions, they're very lonely positions, and there are plenty of other people. I think of Hillary Clinton, who is my hero, my shero in the world. A woman who goes all over the world and just kicks butt. That's what she's been doing. I mean, she is the bomb as far as I'm concerned. How lonely that must be. To be in that position, not just because she's a woman, but because you're kind of in this lead role. So that it was that way. It was kind of lonely. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Is there any advice you would give to get into documentaries, like being a part of documentaries?
Documentaries, that's the best work you can do as far as I'm concerned in the media. Throw away any conceptions about money. There's no money in documentary film. You really have to be passionate about something. So if you have a cause or a belief, or you want to tell a story, that's what drives you. And then you find other people who might do the same kind of thing, and you just go for it. So my advice is get a camera and go tell your story. And everybody has a story, and there's some amazing stories around. Now, because of the way media is set up, you can get on YouTube, you can be on the internet, you can become a star just because of the democracy of video and information now. So it's really easier for you than it was for me. We had to raise lots and lots of money, we had to get crews and all that, and you can do it a little easier, I think, now because of the technology has improved so much. So it's like not to be, I guess my best advice is don't be afraid. Know that your voice is as important as anybody else's voice. I used to, over this last election, well, actually before this last election, there was a blogger, Nate Silver. And Nate Silver is this kind of liberal blogger who is a statistician and has always, you know, had interesting theories about all the statistics and all the polls. And he was like a nobody. But he kept at his work, and he was really good at what he did. The New York Times bought his blog. And now he's like one of the most popular bloggers, journalists, / whatever. And, you know, and it just kind of happened. He had what it takes. So you have to have that. That's the basics. But don't be afraid. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm afraid that the kind of groundbreaking things that you did as a woman, as an African American woman, because of the democratization of the media, because it's all over, that now the women are on, because they have to compete, now they're making them look like they're going to cocktail parties now on the news, instead of, unless they're on national news, but on the local news, it doesn't have that same kind of series, there's a purpose in it, and there's a part of me that thinks they can look however they want if they want to be along even, but men still don't look like that, and that's troubling.
It is troubling. I feel like we are too, but television, the reason you are seeing the women who are, you know, like the sexy women or whatever you're talking about, and the kind of objectification of women on news, it's called news, I'm not sure that's what it is because the competition is so strong, the piece of the pie is so small, they're not making the money. The only reason television is, the only reason Johnny Weissmuller, the only reason TV's there is so somebody can put some money in their pockets. It's not there because they really want to give you any information. It really is a money-making business. So they do what they have to do to make money, and that's what they feel they have to do. There are many women journalists on air who are excellent, but that image is kind of the pervasive image we see now, and it's too bad. But it doesn't mean that you can't get on TV and do a solid piece of work. And like I said, because of the internet, you can get your messages out. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
We all make mistakes, so was there any mistakes that you've ever made, like on air broadcasting that were kind of funny or like?
Absolutely not. Mistakes? Oh, I've made a few mistakes. Boy, I'm trying to think. It's been so long since I've been on TV, I don't remember, but I made many mistakes. I worked with two co-anchors whose job it was to make me laugh. We were kind of the kings and queens of happy talk back then. I don't even know if they talk about this now, where the anchor team is always making jokes and stuff like that, and so they could make me laugh at a drop of the hat, but that was not good. You could get in big trouble, and I could laugh and not get it back together, so that happened a lot of times. I was trying to think if there was a shooting, and this is way back. It was a shooting in Malden or something. This was like in the 80s, and I was doing a live shot. And the police had told us to get out of the way, and it seems to me there was tear gas, there was some whole kind of mess that was going on, and we were still on the air live like idiots trying to do this broadcast, and the whole scene was smoky. Maybe it was a fire, I don't remember, but anyway, I got lost in the smoke and ended up and ducking and dodging or whatever I was doing, and stood up, I was in somebody else's live shot. WCVB's live shot, and I'm Channel 4. That'll go down in history as one of my moments. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on, yeah. You usually get in big trouble. And you can only laugh 20 years later, you know. So, yeah, there's a lot of that. Here's a story that has nothing to do with TV. So when you're on TV, you do all these events. And so I did all these wonderful events, and I hosted the boys club and the girls club and all of this kind of stuff. So when you wore all these gowns, this was back in the day of Dallas the first time, when all the women wore these big old, you see how big I am? Can you imagine how I looked with shoulder pads? They thought I worked for the Patriots. I mean, what was I thinking? So I went to this event at the Marriott down in Cambridge, whatever. And I had all of this sequence on and all of this draped stuff. I mean, those were not my best days. Those were not my best days. And I had this heavy, heavy rhinestone sequence outfit, top, shoulder pads, and a skirt. And I went out into the hotel. My date and I were just arriving, and my skirt fell off. I'm just going to handle it. So I didn't say anything, you know. And my date, John, was trying to scramble to get the skirt off. And people in the hotel, they just walked around like nothing was wrong. That was probably not on air, but that was one of my worst moments in life. I tell you, I got a million of them. Anybody else? Anybody else? I don't know where we are. Yes.
I'm curious what you think are the elements of a good story, because we spend a lot of time trying to teach communication students how to tell a story.
That's a good question. The elements of a good story. Now, I used to think it had to be something like a grabber, but I think if there's a universal, I'm going to have to be a preacher here, truth in that story that I can feel, that the other person can feel, love, hate, loneliness, anger. If you can make me see myself in that, I think that's a good story. Because what stories do is they open us up to community. They bring us in. Your story is going to make me, I get it, or I don't get it. But there's that kind of a visceral reaction. And for me, a good story is something that brings you into my world. I'm sure there's all kinds of definitions, but that would be one good story for me. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Are there any local issues that feel like need to be fixed?
Local issues? Absolutely. In my neighborhood, I'm at Roxbury Presbyterian Church on Warren Street. The schools that I serve, education, number 1. Crime, number 2. Gun control, number 3. You name it. Unemployment. It's right there. Those are the people who come to my church. So those are the issues I face. And you know what's so interesting to me? I went all the way over to Sudan. And I do believe we should be in other parts of the world. And I came back, and we've got some serious issues right here. I didn't have to go. I could have stayed here. So I think we need work all over. But those are the issues in my community. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
When you first decided that you wanted to be on air, what exactly did you have to do to get to that position?
What I did, I was in journalism in high school. So I was on the school newspaper. So I started writing early, and I wanted to be a newspaper writer. I went to college for communications, and I studied writing and liberal arts and that kind of thing. And then I went to graduate school, and I took journalism courses courses and broadcast courses. So it kind of one step to the next. This was in the late 70s, television stations were hiring women and blacks because there were no women and blacks on television. So I was really blessed. I was in the right place at the right time when they were looking for me, looking for people like me, and I had some experience. So my first job was being in the right place at the right time, I'll be honest with you, but I had the skills. And then there was a willingness to move. And once I got into the job, the first job, which was in Little Rock, my hometown, I got that job, but I always had to prove myself because people thought I got that job because I was a woman and I was black. It was true, they were right, but then I had to work. So once I got into the business, then I had to work hard. And so I would stay and do anything and everything. Whatever stories you sent me on, I would do. You asked me for one thing, I'd bring you two. You know, it was that kind of mentality. And I think you still need that. I think that hard work still pays off. Now, I think now, get your own camera, get your story, tell your story, fix your, work on that craft, put your story on YouTube. Keep working on it. Get a reel together. Call the people in the television station. Start with the neighborhood cable station. You know, be willing to do the low stuff to get to the high stuff, and be willing to put in the time and effort. And that's what I would suggest to you now. Yes, ma'am.
Your visit to Sudan, how did it affect you after, in a negative way, positive way?
Sudan probably, I don't think and I've done a lot of stuff, but Sudan probably affected me more than anything I've ever done because I just never seen this kind of poverty. I'd never seen this kind of want. And people were so appreciative of little things. And so you kind of go in with this arrogance. I'll tell you a story. So the first time I went, I'm doing a story, right? I don't have a crew. I'm going to shoot my own story. So of course the most important thing for me is makeup, right? Really? Come on. So I have all this makeup in a big old bag that I'm taking to Africa, to Sudan. 110 degrees. There's no way you're going to wear makeup. I don't care, because it melts. There's nothing to do. And we get to this one village where the truck broke down that was going to carry all our supplies, my cameras, my bags, to the next village, like a 10-mile drive. The truck broke down, and so we had to walk or wait for the next truck. I don't know if you've ever been to any parts of Africa, but waiting is what they do. So you could be waiting for 10 years for the next truck because time is a whole different kind of thing there in Sudan. So we decided we had no choice. We would walk. And these women from this village where we were hired as they would carry our luggage. And so they had my luggage on their head. And this woman is walking for 10 miles in 110 degrees with my Maybelline on her head. And I just felt small. You know, I just felt like, what is that about? I just felt like, who am I? This woman she has nothing. She's giving her all. She could die. She could step on a snake, whatever, with my makeup on her head. So it just kind of shifts your perspective on what you have and what you don't have. And I have millions of these stories, so somebody's going to have to stop me, but I think we're running out of time. But the last story I was going to share with you is that one of the trips we go, and I'm trying to write a book, but right now I just go around and talk my book because I haven't written it. But here's chapter 7. So we go into this, Gloria and I are traveling back and forth. We became the team that did most of the travels. And we're going to back to Sudan to decide on the school or talk to the elders of the village or something. It was very important, this meeting that we were going to do. And we leave Boston. We had to go to Chicago for a meeting to speak and about our work because we were always trying to raise money. So we go from Boston to Chicago to Nairobi. We get to Nairobi before we take a charter flight in with some other human rights activists going into the same place that we were going into. And we realize in Nairobi that our luggage has been lost. And this is another true story. So we have nothing. Now, I didn't tell you this, but when you go into these villages where we were, you take everything you need. You take a tent. You take, it's like, you know, it's sort of like Raiders of the Lost Ark, except for Harrison Ford is not there, and there's nobody with guns, but you have to take everything you need. Take water, because this is the middle of the bush. This is nothing. Nobody has anything. So we're trying to make this decision in Nairobi. Do we keep on going? I'm like, let's go back to Boston. We don't have anything. She's like, no, we've got to go on. We've come too far, and she was right. So we go into Nairobi. We buy what we can in one of those big, you know, supermarkets in Nairobi. But we could only get like T-shirts and maybe some water, just some basics. We're going to be in the bush for like 3 or 4 days, and I'm like, this is crazy. This makes no sense, because you're supposed to take, you know, medical supplies into these places. You're supposed to take hypodermic needles, because this is the bush. Gloria says, no, we're going on faith. We'll be fine. We get to the village, and this is going to be the scene when the movie ends. The book that I haven't written that's going to be the movie. Chapter 7. So here's the scene. We get off the plane. Word has gone ahead of us to this village, Akan, that we've lost everything. They know us. We've been traveling now. So here we are, getting off this little charter plane with our little bags from the supermarket, and the people in the village, true story, come out to meet us. And the women have wraps, their clothes, that they're giving to us. And the men have made this hand-hewn beds, these cots, out of what little wood there is in this area, because the wood's all gone because they've taken all the wood with the war. And they have these cots, and they give it to us. And the old ladies have goat meat. They've cooked for us, and okra, and they've cooked that for us. And children have brought us these sticks that you brush your teeth with. In other words, they have everything we need. Hospitality. They're giving it to us. And it dawns on me as we get off the plane. Here we are, these proud, arrogant Americans, American Christians, because we can save the world. And the world saves us. And so know that there's this reciprocity in the world. We think we got all the answers. We have no answers. We need to listen to the rest of the world, because they got something to say too. So how did it affect me? Nothing has ever impacted me like that. The Sudanese you will see periodically in grocery stores because they work here, or in healthcare facilities, because sometimes they get jobs there. They're tall and very regal people. They're really big people, and they're very black, very quiet, and very dignified. And you see them here and you think, huh, who's that? I just get out of my way, or you don't want to be bothered. And if you go over there and you learn about their history, and the fact that they've been fighting a war for 2-3 decades, and the people in the village where we were fighting with spears up until the 1960s against I'm not pronouncing it right, but the bombs, for the Russian bombs and the AK-47s, they were fighting with spears because they believed in something, that they were protecting their land. So how does it impact me? It's changed everything. We get over here, we're whining, we're moaning and groaning. We don't know anything about sacrifice. You know? We don't know anything about doing without. The poorest of the poor of us are richer than most of the world. That's what has impacted me, and that's what I want us to know. And then you see these idiots in Congress. Don't even get me started. This is why I won't be preaching long. I'll never get a job on TV, and I'll never run for political office, but it feels so good to be able to say what you feel. When you go out in the rest of the world, you just get a different perspective. And it's not what you see on TV. They're not all fighting. They don't all hate us. They don't even know who we are. They're trying to survive, just like we are. And we need to bring it all together. That's the end. I'll start preaching. Thank you very much. God bless you.